Fired on Mars is quite literally the adult animated series that you've all been asking for. Literally. It's right there, staring you in the face. It's that one hypothetical show y'all keep bringing up when you keep asking for a show that doesn't rely on poopy humor or fast pop culture references and doesn't look like ass. It's right there. It's right there, dog. And we've been sleeping on it. If a fraction of the people who were foaming at the mouth that somebody could consider the Paw Patrol movie to be kinda decent at some point turned around and watched this show, I wouldn't be here. We wouldn't need to be talking about this. But alas, we have a problem on our hands. Fired on Mars is the newest addition to the HBO Max line of original animated series, and it is also unlike anything else that you would see in traditional TV animation. The series follows this guy named Jeff, a graphic designer who uprooted his whole life on Earth to work and live in this giant startup colony located on Mars. After he gets fired from his position, he's forced to bounce around a little bit and is slowly ingratiated into this big, wide world in this tiny-ass little village of people. Or is it? With this bare bones pitch that I just gave you, you would probably assume that this is your standard, adult adventure comedy hanging on Netflix or something. But trust me when I say, it has an incredible story. And that's not even counting what's actually in the show. The idea for Fired on Mars originates from a 2016 short film of the same name. With the same characters and the same basic premise, it does function as a strong pitch in and of itself. As far as we're aware, the main two guys responsible for it aren't even really animators. They kind of just had office jobs and put this together at some point. And they got into festivals, won a couple of awards. But for the most part, it kind of fell under the radar. A few years after, the same guys put together a 3-part short for Adult Swim. Tonally, those two are a lock, and the work that they did on this garnered a little more attention, but nothing that really elevates it beyond that first film that they did. Fast forward a few more years after that, and they are finally given the opportunity to turn Fired on Mars into a full-fledged series. That would roughly bring us up to the current year when on April 18th it was announced that this show was coming. And they only gave us 2 days to prepare for it. So they dropped this trailer, and it's getting upstaged by people who didn't know about it until the trailer dropped. But outside of a few general examples, HBO Max has not extended itself to really promote the shit out of this. And that's a damn shame. About a month before the trailer dropped, they sent these guys out to WonderCon to talk about the show, but how was anyone supposed to find that? They didn't even know that this show existed yet. Worthless. Absolutely worthless. You really thought you did something here, huh? Now, they're in a bit of an interesting position here, because while their adult animation library is not particularly vast, it's also not particularly controversial either. It's pretty middle of the road when you think about it. You've got Close Enough, and you've also got The Prince. You've got 10-Year-Old Tom, but you've also got Santa Inc. And considering that the last major release before Fired on Mars was Velma, this seems like a particularly appropriate show to try and promote, along with the rest of the shows you got. I don't necessarily believe in putting one show down to uplift another, but if it is any consolation to you, I will say that the protagonists from those two shows are vastly different, for understandable reasons, but it's like night and day. Jeff is our everyman. He's a bit of a wet blanket, a bit of a pushover, but he is a good guy and he genuinely just wants to do the right thing. He just wants to keep to himself and be the best dang graphic designer that he could be. But he's plunged into a whole slew of bad situations, and you do kind of see him spiral at points. But he never really loses that edge. He still has a sense of self, even when he's floating in the dead vacuum of space with the rest of these plebs. He goes through a lot of humanistic struggle. Inherently, he's juggling his role between two different worlds, while still finding himself caught in the middle, not really neatly fitting into one or the other. He has constantly fell victim to the sickeningly adult corporate culture built up at Marsley, an environment that would be innately familiar to a good chunk of people watching. It is genuinely infuriating to see him suffer through all the shit that he does, and watching him constantly grow and adapt to changes, not necessarily all for the better, is part of what makes Fired on Mars so memorable. There aren't too many adult cartoons on right now that are so thoroughly dramatic in approach. Whatever comedic moments are sprinkled here and there are coming mainly from characterization, rather than from quick cut gags or references. Unless you count the music, which is definitely 80s inspired at the very least, but not at all distracting given the context. I went to see Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 Thursday night, and for as much of a mortal gut punch as that film is, it didn't make me feel as strongly about its brutalities as I did about this series. Fundamentally because this is much closer to home, but also because Jeff is just the pure heart and soul of this entire thing. Just when you think old Jeffy Boy is gonna eke out a win, they triple backhand you with more tragedy. Every time you think we might have a normal resolution on our hands, there is always a wild-ass cliffhanger lying in wait. Every single time. I also wanted to highlight the visuals and how much I like them. They have never made Mars look so distinguished. Tintin was cited as a inspiration for the character design, which comes from a school of thought that emphasizes thin outlines and strong colors, and Fired on Mars definitely subscribes to that aesthetic. Most of you looking at this right now would probably be thinking, this looks a lot like King of the Hill. And surprise, surprise, it's a primary form of inspiration for this duo's whole vibe. This is the net result of Mike Judge's influence, and I'm so on board for more. Engaging visuals, compelling characters, monumentally moving storytelling, all culminating in a piece of art that could genuinely change the game if it's given the chance to. And I think this time, we might actually have a shot at making that happen. See, a lot of cartoons nowadays are kind of batched out. Maybe they ask for 80 episodes off the bat, but it's all part of one big order, so that when the time comes, they can chunk it out into smaller 20-episode seasons to kind of inflate the count a little bit. A good chunk of the time, these shows are finished before they're even started. You sit down and you get to know something on a deeper level, and before you know it, it's gone with the wind. But this one might actually have a chance of clearing another order. I have graciously been given the opportunity to have access to screener copies of the entire season, and let me tell you, it is seriously hitting different. There's a couple more episodes heading to HBO Max. Thursday is typically the day. It's time to drum up some more support for this thing. Get on out there, support Fired on Mars, let the people know, deliver the message. If you let this opportunity pass you by, you ain't never gonna see anything like it again. That's not a threat, that's a promise. Do not waste this opportunity. With fantastic writing, a particularly strong voice cast, and a genuine flair for the dramatics. This series is nothing that you would find firmly planted on solid ground. It's Fired on Mars, and it is one of the best experiences you can find in this galaxy or next.